We don't think that soldiers are used for this. We think you're advocating for child police, right? Go ahead. The cute one.
Your system, you have an incentive for the brutalization and murder of these children, which is
no, we think that you legitimize the act of doing that within the eyes of the international.
Yes.
In all of Emily's analysis as to why we can't do this as an international community. Why even if this is inevitable, we ought not endorse it. Silly. The third thing under this that we need to recognize is that clearly adults are better suited to fight, right? Whether it be men and training men within these communities to deal with it. Or, like crazy Amazonian women. That would be cool, right? I don't think Amazonian is like small ones. Okay. The second question of the debate is, should the international community prohibit the use of child soldiers? Something completely disregarded by the last speaker. That's unfortunate, right? What we would say is that the international community is charged with upholding norms that are universal through laws. This is where we derive the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You have absolutely no human rights if these rights are not universal. What we would say is that we don't allow exceptions because that undermines universality. At the point at which you say Africa is so messed up that we ought make an exception for them because child soldiers will inevitably be recruited anyway, you are making a moral contradiction within the law itself. This means that you undermine universality in and of itself, but furthermore what you say is that child soldiers ought to be used, but wait, they ought not be used. Only not by rebels, but used by other rebels, right? We think it's an arbitrary distinction to say that one rebel group is better than another. We think that when you force that hand to be played, you actually make a vast mistake. You support more and more people being killed. That's problematic. Okay. The last question of the debate. What happens to the children? Yeah, it's all about the kids, right? We think three things happen. There are three tangible impacts that we get out of both sides of the debate. First is that choice is abrogated, right? We hear out of the last government bench, and I'll take you at the end of this, I'll give you an opportunity. Then we hear on the last bench that children now have the choice to become members of different armies, of militias. We think that that is not at all true, right? We think that even if you coerce them under the status quo, that coercion doesn't go away. When the threat of them dying if they don't, when the threat of them not being capable of defending themselves doesn't go away with it. That means that the coercion exists, that children can't possibly make that decision, and that means that all of Jack's analysis of how the child chooses and thus avoids the benefit of an education and children feeling better about being child soldiers is completely irrelevant. Go ahead.
We're prepared to sacrifice moral universality if it means a child can go to an aid camp and get out without being scared that that's committed a crime.
That's not the solution, right? You have failed to prove to us why that's the only way to do this. Because you need to deal with it, and we think at the point at which you haven't told us that this is the last resort, that we ought not deal with it. Okay? Alright. The second harm are psychological harms. Because even if you don't buy that children don't have a choice regardless, then you still have to reject the ridiculous notion that children are somehow immune to the psychological harms at the point at which they have that choice. We think that adults are barely capable of dealing with these things, but children certainly are not. You literally turn these children into beasts. You completely remove their ability to reintegrate into society later on. We think you dehumanize these individuals even further than they would in the status quo. But the last thing we would say is that you've killed children. That's bad. The children might run and tell. That's why they tell you we kill them in the status quo. We say that those things still would exist. Children would try and run away and get killed. Children will be killed as a form of intimidation and psychological control. That doesn't get solved at the point at which these children will become rebel soldiers anyway. At the end of the day, you must uphold international standards of universality at the point at which they solve nothing.
it's all there to be put forward. You know, now our judges now withdraw to discuss their decision. They will be back in about 3 or 4 hours' time because it's extremely difficult to make any decision. And I will be announcing the speaker, the single individual speaker who will be winning the Jon Snow Speaking Cup tonight. Our master of ceremonies here.
Guys, a few very quick things. So let's get a huge round of applause for our judging panel who are following